This is the Open University.
Hello, Open University. It's a beautiful early summer evening, and I wanted to talk about a song I'm kind of obsessed with at the moment. It's Eckhard Schall, who's he's dead now, but he was a German actor who played in the Berliner Ensemble, and he's singing a song with lyrics by Bertolt Brecht and a music by Hanns Eisler. And I'm kind of obsessed just now with Hanns Eisler. The song he's singing on this record, which I bought in the Naukron Flohmarkt, there's a regular record store there, which sells, the usual kind of Amiga and Litera label records, which were East German communist period records. This is marked with the Berliner Ensemble logo because he was a member of it, and the song is Von der Freundlichkeit der Welt. It's about the friendliness of the world, 1920, music by Hanns Eisler. And let's go and listen to it, shall we? I'm going to switch to another camera for this. So this is my system. I'm going to go to it says CD, but it's actually the vinyl. And he talks a little bit at the beginning of this. Oops.
Von der Freundlichkeit der Welt. Auf die Erde voller kaltem Wind kamt ihr alle als ein nacktes Kind. Frierend lag ihr ohne alle Haar, als ein Weib aus einem Windelbad. Keiner schrie euch, ihr wart nicht begehrt, und man holte euch nicht im Gefährt. Hier auf Erden wart ihr unbekannt, als ein Mann euch eins nahm an der Hand. Ja, die Welt, die ist euch gar nicht schuld, keiner hält euch, wenn ihr gehen wollt. Vielen Kindern war es vielleicht gleich, viele aber weinten über euch. Von der Erde voller kaltem Wind geht ihr alle bedeckt mit Schorf und Rind. Fast ein jeder hat die Welt geliebt, wenn man ihm zwei Hände Erde gibt.
Phew. I actually got it right there.
Gegenlied zu Von der Freundlichkeit der Welt.
That sort of amazes me because it's so simple in a way. It's got that rhythm going all the way through it. And then the vocal is just... So the really remarkable thing about that for me is just how simple it is, and yet how kind of atonal and daring it is, how modernist it is. Because most of the song is just doing this. And then it has this little riff that goes... And then there's a descending riff, a line that sort of complements that, which goes something like that. It goes down, dum dum dum, and kind of that shouldn't work, and yet you can tell that underneath the kind of modernist atonality, there's some kind of there's Bach. And there's Mozart in there, just bubbling under the surface. So I really kind of want to do a cover of that, as I did a cover of the other Eisler, another Eisler song, which is actually Eisler with a lyric by Heinrich Heine, who was a Jewish German poet and radical liberal at the time when even Metternich was an arch conservative and actually tried to ban Heine from publishing. And so Heine went to live in Paris for the last 25 years of his life. And he was related to Karl Marx, and they had a correspondence. And so on my accordion, which I just bought in my local junk shop the other day, I've learned to play this Eisler setting of Heine, but it's really hard to mic up without the accordion dwarfing the voice. That's what I've been finding. It kind of goes like... Sometimes I see darkness stir behind the longing in your eyes, and recognize my old misfortune, failure in love, failure in living. You look so sad, it's overpowering, but I can give you back your youth, a resolution to your heartbreak. Failure in love, failure in living. Like that, the buttons obviously make the chords easier on an accordion to play, but it still took me an hour or so to master this one. It's a very, very short piece, and it's not quite as atonal as the other Eisler piece. Eisler, once I met Michael Nyman at the Royal Festival Hall after some event, and I asked him which of Brecht's collaborators do you think was the best, and he said Eisler for sure. And Eisler was the most staunchly communist of Brecht's collaborators. I mean, Kurt Weill is the famous one, but Kurt Weill, of course, just wanted to make Broadway shows and get famous in America and all the rest of it. And he hated Brecht, actually, and Lotte Lenya, his wife, who played in so many Brecht pieces, also disliked Brecht, whereas Eisler was a very good friend of Brecht. This is according to Eric Bentley, who's 103 years old now, and is an amazing interpreter of Brecht, and has actually a couple of albums out there, very obscure records, which Eric Bentley does Eisler, sings Eisler, which I recommend you track down. In fact, I might even splice in an excerpt.
Oh, sprinkling of gardens, oh, sprinkling to encourage green, watering the thirsty bushes, give more than enough. Give more, give more, give more than enough. And do not forget the shrubbery, even if it bear no fruit and is worn out. Do not forget between the flowers the weeds, for they too feel thirst. Now you may water just the freshest lawns, or just what's very scorched, and the naked ground. Refresh the ground, the naked ground.
He's amazing. He's still very compos mentis at 103 years old. He met Brecht, he knew Brecht when Brecht came to America in the 40s, because Eric Bentley was one of these sort of Oxford-educated communists, along with Blunt, Anthony Blunt, and all those sorts of third-manish kind of people, the apostles at Oxford, who were posh communists, champagne socialists, spies, often. And some of them went to, like Guy Burgess went to Moscow and disappeared there. But Eric Bentley went off to America and witnessed all that charade about Brecht having to answer to the Un-American Activities Committee and escape the very next day back to Europe, and hence found the Berlin Ensemble. But Eisler was photographed at the interview he did for the Un-American Activities Commission, the McCarthyite witch hunts, in other words, making this gesture of rebellion and of solidarity with his communist colleagues and friends. So he was much more a man of the cause than Kurt Weill was. And also, I think, much more interesting as a composer. So I've had this sort of fantasy of doing a Momus Eisler covers or tribute record of some kind, and just teaching myself all these things like the Hollywood Elegies, for instance, which is a really beautiful piece that, a series of pieces, a suite. This city is named after the angels.
Die Stadt ist nach den Engeln genannt, und man begegnet allenthalben Engeln. Sie riechen nach Öl und tragen goldene Pisare und mit blauen Ringen um die Augen füttern sie allmorgendlich die Schreiber in ihren Schwimmpfühlen.
I know it from Robin Archer's version. I also have Tank Battles, which is the songs of Eisler by Dagmar Krause, and that's very recommended. I have that on CD, so it's a bit less accessible. I'll show you my Robin Archer records. She is an Australian sort of cabaret singer, and so when I did, for instance, last year, the Ballad on Improving of the World, doctors who throw back every hard-out patient, like anglers throwing back a too small fish, I can't avoid and lay my sickly body upon their couch to carve up as they wish. I saw the murderers and the victims also, and with a bleeding heart and failing nerve, saw how the murderers singled out their victims and shouted, "I approve," without reserve. I see them coming, see the butchers marching, would like to call out stop, but since meanwhile I know their agents are behind me watching, I hear my own voice calling at them, "Heil!" These are the two records that I have by Robin Archer of Brecht. The first one I got was this one, Robin Archer Sings Brecht. It's Dominic Muldowney. So my pickup point was obviously when David Bowie did the Brecht Ball EP, some of which also Charles does. Let me give you a little blast of Charles.
War der Himmel schon so groß und still und kahl, jung und nackt und ungeheuer, wundersam, wie ihn bald dann liebte, als Baal kam.
Once the earth's dark woman off the rotting bough, even then the sky was waiting quiet and pale, naked, young, immensely marvelous. That's the way Bowie does it on the Baal EP.
Any vice for Baal has got its useful side. It's the men who practice it he can't abide. Vices have their point once you see it as such. Stick to two, for one will be too much.
Once you see it as such, stick to two, for one will be too much, etc., etc. Very appropriate music to play on an accordion, I think you'll agree, or a banjo. So yeah, I was really turned on to Dominic Maldani's take with the London Sinfonietta on these Brecht songs by Bowie's Bal. Chris O'Leary on the Bowie Songs blog has a nice kind of parallel world where David Bowie never made any more records after Bal, that was his last art statement. And we never had Let's Dance and Tin Machine and all the rest of it. And actually, perhaps he would have come back online with the Black Star album, because he didn't really get strange and arty very much after Bal, did he? But it was hugely important for me, and songs like The Drowned Girl, my take on The Drowned Girl, which is another of these Bal songs, really was, that taught me a huge amount, the way Bowie handled that. The vocal of that is fantastic. The way he says corpse, the very last word of that song is corpse, and he draws it out so long. One more corpse, and his voice sort of gets weaker and softer and yet more urgent, and then the ps at the end of corpse is so expressive. Fantastic. I don't think The Drowned Girl is on this one, but you have so many Eisler, All of Us or None, for instance. He also wrote the Solidarity song, lots of sort of communistic marching songs and things with Brecht, but I think he was really an aesthete at heart. He was also very politically very engaged. So the first album concentrates more on the viol collaborations, and then the second album, Volume 2, which came out a year or so later, came out in 1984, is more the subtle kind of Eisler type stuff, which is much more like chamber music, it's more serious as music, and it's more atonal, and it's kind of takes more risks. So I'm sort of fascinated by the place where songs which are tonal start to disintegrate, and where the composer really takes risks with tonality and with harmony and counterpoint and all the rest of it. Because I'm not musically sophisticated myself, but I'm just very impressed by that sort of stuff. I remember hearing Charles Ives for the first time, and a piano arrangement of Shall We Gather by the River, which is an old kind of Protestant hymn. But Charles Ives had done this setting of it, which was really kind of unusual, really quite atonal, and taking it to the very edge of coherence. I think that's a fascinating catwalk to be on, just seeing how daring you can be with your piano arrangements and with your counterpoint and with kind of just clashes of disharmony and I think that's a really interesting direction for me to possibly take on my next record. It kind of I wish I'd been trained musically. I wish I'd gone to music academy, but I kind of don't at the same time. The nice thing is that when Eckhard Schall, for instance, does the Ballad of the Adventurers from Bal, he does it and he really shouts it. So because Brecht was in this theatre tradition, he was not terribly interested in musical technical problems and effects. He was much more interested in his epic theatre, his ideas about epic theatre and about the quotable gesture and about actors kind of presenting themselves in ways that prevent the audience from identifying too much. And I think you can see parallels in Eisler's music. You prevent the sentimentality that you can hear very clearly in Kurt Weill, for instance, from swamping the listener. Brecht had this thing about people should stay critical. They should be able to change their society. They should want to change their society, and they should want to make the music difficult to identify with, but not throwing away entirely the kind of sentimental power of music, because obviously that's a great power. But just kind of wrong foot to the listener a little bit, just enough to keep it interesting. So because Brecht was doing that, you can get interpretations of these songs by, for instance, Eckhard Schall, where he really shouts and kind of screws up some of the songs. There's another version on YouTube of him doing that same Friendliness of the World song, where he sings it totally differently on a different note, and disregarding the musicality of the... Perhaps he had a musical director on that record who forced him to do it the way Eisler had written it. But then he's doing it for a TV program a bit later, and he totally screws it up or changes it in ways which don't make it better. So I think he has a tendency to shout, Schall, and... or had, rather. We speak of the dead. So that's what I'm kind of obsessed with musically, and these Brecht songs do keep coming back to haunt me, because we're living in quite extreme political times when the messages seem to be as relevant as ever politically, but also just in terms of where I'm at in my musical development. I'm interested in... I love these traditional instruments which I'm buying at the Berlin flea markets, and I love the German tradition which I'm buying into. All these German paperbacks I have here, and German records I'm listening to. I've obviously gone through my stage of being into Japanese folk music, and I'm really fascinated by folk music of all kinds. And what I like is really when it surprises me, when it departs from what pop music would do, and often has a rougher edge. I mean, if you listen to the difference between the Rolling Stones, for instance, doing the blues as they did recently on a tribute record to John Lee Hooker and people like that, and then go back to actual John Lee Hooker and hear what he's doing, there are often kind of timing anomalies and tuning anomalies and kind of eccentricities of arrangement which the Stones have eradicated. And it's precisely those things which interest me, the things which don't seem logical or right or somehow jar on the ear. And that music's all about the release of tensions, sort of building up tensions which then can be released. So for instance, on that very atonal Eisler song that Schall sings, the Friendliness song, it's really hearing those little the little lines that give away that there is some of those low notes come in the middle of the verse, and you start to realize that this is just a rhythmic device. It's two consecutive notes, which is a no-no in in music, but it's and then it's got this weird kind of it's got all that stuff going on which sounds like a kind of insane scale. But you can hear from the arrangements that Eisler knows what he's doing, and he's sort of he's deliberately making a kind of chopsticks, kind of modernist chopsticks. But then he's got the chops as well. He's got the old-fashioned arrangement ideas which do come in and remind you that he's not just messing about, he knows what he's doing. Anyway, that's the kind of thing that fascinates me, and what I'm listening to just now. Voila.
Open University.